It is Friday, November 15th. Let's talk PlayStation. Starting off, as always, with our PlayStation Plus games. As a quick reminder, the November titles are Neo and Outlast 2. You have plenty of time to download either of these games or add them to your library. And Neo, you really should try it. You might as well. I think you might really enjoy it. Now, I just wanted to briefly mention, actually, but it is November 15th, which 6 years ago today, the PlayStation 4 came out. 6 years we've had with this console, so happy birthday, PlayStation 4. I just thought I'd mention that. Now, our first real news story, which this is just so funny and somewhat ironic, I think, but if you remember, way back when the Uncharted movie actually, started, right, when that project began, Mark Wahlberg was one of the first people attached to the project to play Nathan Drake. And then he dropped out, got a lot of different directors, script changes, then the whole story basically changed from a regular Nathan Drake to an origin story, where it's a young Nathan Drake being tutored by Sully. And that's Tom Holland, who's still technically attached to the project right now. Well, Mark Wahlberg circled back around, and now he's going to play Sully. So the interest is there, I guess, for Mark to take on that role now. And so really came full circle. What do you even say, right? I mean, I guess it makes sense. Mark didn't really age all that much, and the character, while it's different, he's still just going to play a regular grown man, so I suppose it worked out. I mean, let me tell you something. This movie is either never going to come out, and if it does, it's probably not going to be very good. So we've got a very minor but somewhat notable update on The Last of Us Part 2's multiplayer mode. That's not being a mode anymore, but rather its own separate product that will get released at some point after the base game comes out. Over on Twitter, Naughty Dog Jobs posted a listing for an online systems programmer. They're looking for some talent. And then it was retweeted, I believe, by another Naughty Dog employee stating that we have big ambitions for this project. Come join us. That seems kind of self-explanatory. I guess it's just a matter of, to the extent of what is this really going to look like? Is it going to be a separate product that you buy, so it's a straight-up $30 sub-priced game, or maybe Naughty Dog is going to go full-blown a premium multiplayer Last of Us experience that commands a $60 price tag? I would hope not, to be honest. I'd rather them go the free-to-play route. Maybe they're going to go for scenarios of plentiful amounts of modes. Sure, you can shoehorn in a battle royale mode of some kind. I'm sure Naughty Dog can make that kind of play style work in the stealth-like setting of not necessarily 100 players, but you could bump it up to 20, 30 and have this really big, massive environment, because they're already building a lot of these worlds in the base single-player game, mind you. So obviously that kind of ties in, right, where you have all these assets built. And so, I mean, there's a lot of avenues where they can go, right? I'm trying to look at it from their perspective. This product, at some point, got way too big. They took it out of the single-player experience. So I can see them doing something where they drop this thing on the PlayStation Store, free to play, and tons of cosmetic stuff. Obviously, we want to try and avoid all the loot box territory and pay to win and all that nonsense, but I think that would be kind of a pretty good approach. Call it The Last of Us Factions or something, right? Because, again, it's going to be marketed and shown off as its own thing. So it's really more speculative at this point, but at the very least, we have a good understanding that, hey, what they're working on is a very real thing, and it's coming at some point. Next up, we've got my favorite news story of this past week. I absolutely love open, frank honesty in the games industry. That's what's going on here. So if you don't know, it's currently Inside Xbox 2019 in London. That's Microsoft's little event, kind of like PSX, a celebration of Xbox. A lot of great announcements if you're an Xbox fan. We're not going to go over those, obviously, but what we are going to be talking about is Xbox head Phil Spencer. He was talking to The Verge about Scarlett and how it's basically going to try and match PlayStation 5 and not be the same scenario as Xbox One and PS4 back in 2013. So Phil was quoted as saying, "I would say a learning from the Xbox One generation is we will not be out of position on power or price." He goes on to say, "If you remember the beginning of this generation, we were $100 more expensive, and yes, we were less powerful. And we started Project Scarlett with this leadership team in place with a goal of having market success." I've said this on numerous occasions. I will say it again. Phil Spencer is a great leader with Xbox. He's done a lot of fantastic things. But more importantly, what I love about him is that he's very open, he's honest, and he comes off as a believable person. So often, with not just in games, but any industry, you have to deal and weed through all this robotic talk, this PR speak, especially for somebody of such a high corporate level. And it's understandable. It's so commonplace that you kind of expect it, really. But even in a scenario like this, where he just openly says, look, we were lesser compared to the competition, and he doesn't try to play it off in this manner of saying like, oh, but we had this Grand Wah vision with Kinect and we felt we had the superior product, and to an extent we still do. Like, he just brushes that off. No, we were $100 more, we were the lesser box, and that's how it is. And that's what I like about Phil. He goes further on in this Verge article to say that he still sees plenty of generations beyond not just Scarlett, but further Xbox generations, which bodes well if you're into consoles, if you're into the Xbox platform. That's the thing. If you're an Xbox diehard, of course you want them to stay. If you're a PlayStation diehard, trust me, you don't want Microsoft to drop out of the generation. It's great to have this multitude of options, especially going into a landscape where digital sales are exceeding physical sales. When 5-10 years down the road, streaming becomes the be-all, end-all way to play games. You want multiple manufacturers, and again, when hardware drops out, you still want multiple publishers in the race. I mean, you want this market competition. Sometimes you're annoyed by that, but trust me, you want that in there. And so it's great to hear that with the vision of Scarlett being matching PlayStation 5, I'm all for that. Absolutely go for it. And I mentioned this during Scarlett's initial little tease during their E3 press conference, and that it sounds very identical to PlayStation 5. I don't think we're really going to be in a scenario where it's going to be that dramatically different via the power and price route. One's probably going to be a little bit more powerful, and if you really want to go down that route of conversation, from what we're hearing rumor-wise, some developers are saying that the current PS5 dev kit and targeted specs are greater than Scarlett. But I don't even think it's really going to matter. I really don't. We're in a land where it's not about the price of the box, because it's going to be pretty similar. It's not about the power, because it's going to be pretty similar. It's going to be about your feature set. It's going to be about your software. And I think down the road, more importantly, how you approach certain things. I think something like this goes a long way. But we're going into, I think, a pretty level playing ground, and now the software and features are really going to speak for themselves. And that's what excites me about it. And just as a quick jumping off news story for the XO19 event, another thing that came out, and this is pretty much an Xbox story, but it's still interesting. Microsoft claims that they're shifting away from studio acquisitions and now execution. So basically what they're saying is that from these 15 some odd studios that they now have, because they've acquired 6 or 7, I think 8 developers in the last year and a half. We've done topics on that as well. It's a very aggressive approach, and I'm all for that. But a lot of developer acquisitions, basically they're saying, okay, we've got them. Now it's time to execute, as in let's start development cycles and put out some fantastic games. Which for Microsoft, their current strategy, just to get you caught up, they're putting games everywhere. They want software sales, they want subscription sales, they're going for Xbox Game Pass. That's why they're putting all these games on there day and date. They're talking more about xCloud and how you can play your Xbox One games everywhere. That's going to be a big thing with Scarlett, more than likely. So that's their strategy, and I can't wait to see how it plays out for them, really, when we have 2 brand new machines come out at the end of 2020. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Moving on, Shop2.net recently tweeted out a listing to Dreams on PS4 with a release date for February 14th, 2020. Now, this is interesting, of course, because Dreams does not have its own individual listings on retailers and things like that. It's just an early access. We have no idea what's going on in terms of a physical release for that game, except, well, Shop2 just posted out this imagery. I think they put a price on it, too, of like £32 sterling, so then it was quickly removed, and so that's where we're at right now. When it comes to online retailer listings and things like that, it's kind of a weird way to say this, but they're either 100% right or 100% wrong. And what I mean by that is you don't always see some middle ground here where a retailer will put out a listing of like, oh, this game's going to come out October 16th. This game's going to come out February 3rd, right? It's usually a placeholder date that is very clearly not correct, with not box art or anything of the sort. No marketing material has been drawn up or anything like that, right? Or they're 100% correct in that they have the marketing material, they have this kind of weird obscure date that you would think, oh, that might actually be when it comes out, and that is when it comes out. So I think we're actually leaning towards this might being in the scenario where they're right. And then February's close. You know, that's not too far away. That's not like a situation where this game is being slated for September 2020 and we've got all this marketing material drafted up. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for the retailer to know that so far in advance, right? So maybe Sony's in a scenario and Media Molecule's in a scenario where we will get a better understanding of what this game will look like at retail, and possibly some single-player content, because this is something that they've reiterated, is that at some point this game will have a traditional story-based piece of single-player content that players can go through, so they're not just buying a creative experience where they're just exploring other people's creations and trying to make stuff their own. There's still actual content to be played, made from Media Molecule, and probably people that they've contracted out, because we've had job listings for that. So, but As of right now, the listing's gone. Sony hasn't said anything, so we'll see what happens. Now let's talk about this very interesting Sony patent that sprung up this past week for a cartridge-like device. So this was uncovered by Let's Go Digital, whom have been really good at uncovering all these patents lately, but this one shows a cartridge device, and it's in Portuguese, but the listing, I believe, describes it, when you translate it, as a configurable data storage, data recording device. And that's really all we can go on. So as always with patents, we've got to remember two things. This may never actually come out because companies file patents all the time. And two, this is highly speculative when we start talking about this thing. So with those two things out of the way, let's talk. The funny thing is, this got a lot of attention this past week, which is fine, but I saw so many news stories and articles calling this thing like for PS Vita 2, or one of them called it PSP 5G. It was like so ridiculous. Some of that stuff I'm reading, I'm like, oh my god, why are you guys running your news story like this? It's not for another Sony handheld. It's not going to happen. Sony's not making another handheld. I love PlayStation Vita, but it's not going to happen. So the real, well, better educated guess is that, hey, this could possibly be for SSD storage expansion on PlayStation 5, which, if we are going to speculate, yes, that would seem to make the most sense if it is in fact for PlayStation 5. Remember, we had a cartridge-like patent last year, and it was for this weird little obscure toy that Sony released in Japan. So could be for anything. Keep that in mind. Now, if it is for PS5, the SSD expansion would make sense. I think that's something so many people are overlooking still about PS5, is that for 10 years on PS3 and PS4, we had the luxury of buying whatever 2.5-inch laptop hard drive you wanted. It was a third-party, regular part that you could go get on sale at Best Buy, Amazon, wherever. It didn't matter. It was user upgradable. It was very easy. The only hard part about it was if you're doing a fresh boot, you had to make sure you had the complete firmware of the system's OS installed on a USB thumb drive or something like that to properly boot up the system. But otherwise, super straightforward and easy, and it was great that you could buy it from wherever, and you didn't have to, if you didn't want to go the route of an external hard drive just hanging off your system, you know, you could do it the proper way and properly expand your storage. So we're not going to be able to do that on PS5 and Xbox Scarlett, even Xbox Scarlett, right? We've got highly specialized SSDs in these things. Certainly it's going to be proprietary in some way. Now, we don't even know if it's like the PCI 4.0 standard or whatever they're really going with, but again, this is quite clearly a scenario where they're not going to let you just take a regular internal SSD and shove it inside these things. In all likelihood, they're going to have something proprietary that's booting and loading off of this thing. It might even be soldered onto the board, or who knows what they're doing. But we're losing this luxury, and so I think this might be a scenario where Sony's exploring avenues of still allowing OEM-style user upgradable data storage. So instead of having something hanging off your system, it would look a bit more finished to have these little cartridges that could maybe slide in the back or something. So again, it doesn't obscure the look of the box or anything like that. I don't know, it makes sense. What my concern would be, if this were even true, is that we are now going back to a land of proprietary storage offers from Sony, which means, much like Memory Stick Pro Duo or PlayStation Vita memory cards, they're overpriced, expensive, and Sony doesn't know how to make them reasonably priced for the consumer that wants to buy them. So that's what worries me more than anything else, is that, oh, okay, cool, yeah, we could buy more SSD storage, which is great. Well, no, for one, SSDs are still higher priced per gigabyte over traditional spinning hard drives. And then it's Sony. I mean, they seem to not be very good with pricing expandable storage, and so that would be my concern. But I don't think there's really much else we can go on. This may not even be for this, right? But it seems to make the most sense, and I would venture that's going to happen much more likely than to get another Sony handheld. Now let's get to Death Stranding. The game is out, and we're seeing some things play out which are worthy of talking about. The first one, it charted number 2 on the UK sales chart, being beat by Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So a lot of people are talking about this because Days Gone, when it debuted, it shot up to number 1 right away in the UK. And so there's the question being begged of, oh, does it look like Death Stranding is not doing all that well? Which, if you're going to ask me, I would have said, even before this game came out, in terms of sales numbers, because I think it is a bit hard to predict. Obviously, it's not like it's not a normal game by any stretch. So it's not, I don't think it's really going to do normal game numbers. I think it's in the neighborhood of maybe something like Detroit Become Human, right? It's going to move a few million. It's gonna. To imply that this game's not going to sell a few million copies, I think would be kind of ignorant. So it's just a matter of how many million. Maybe it could hit 5, maybe it could hit 6 or 7. I don't think it's going to get in the 10 million plus range. I think it's going to float around 2 to 3 million in a very conservative manner. That's like where Detroit is basically. It's just a different kind of game. It's not for everybody, but there's a dedicated following, people that are into this genre, this new social strand genre technically. So I think that's kind of where it'll place. And so, something like Modern Warfare, I don't think it's really that concerning that the game didn't chart at number 1. The bigger talking point about Death Stranding, though, is the review scores and Kojima's response to them, which for Europe and Asia, he basically said, we have good scores there, quite pleased with them. But when it comes to America, he said that's a territory that sometimes likes their first-person shooters, and so he feels as though we got more criticisms there because people didn't quite understand the genre or what he was going for. So there's a few different translations, but they basically boil down to just that. And understandably, he's getting a lot of criticism and backlash for making those statements, which this is really at the height of this quite vigorous rhetoric of now being against Kojima. That's the thing. This happens so much with like products or even people where the more praise something gets, at some point it peaks, and then, detractors come out of the woodwork of saying product A isn't all that great or person B isn't all that great. And that's where Kojima's finding himself in quite often nowadays where, the guy does kind of really put himself out there a lot. And so you can see how it's so easily kind of becomes a sticking point for people to say, I'm tired of seeing Kojima. He's so full of himself, this and that. And that's fine, think what you want. I don't think the comments really, it's not a good look. I mean, it doesn't sound great, but to the same effect, I don't think it really means any harm. And I don't really think he's trying to come off as like salty either, to be honest. I mean, look at the guy. He's 56 years old. His life is making games. Whether you like him or not, I mean, the guy loves video games. He's passionate about what he does. It's his craft. He puts his blood, sweat, and tears into it. He left Konami. This was a big deal for him. I mean, whatever. You don't like him, but the guy was thrilled with this game. He couldn't wait for it to come out. He was doing something really different and odd. I mean, that's just where he's coming from. And so as a creator, whether he did or didn't take criticism, it happens. But context is important. I don't know if he's being sarcastic, and I don't really know if he's being disingenuous, but to me, it seemed like that's just how he said it, that, hey, this is maybe why we got criticism here. I don't think it was purposely derogatory, but to that same effect, it just wasn't really the best comment to make after the game shipping and then talking about the review scores, on top of, again, the rhetoric that's going on right now when it comes to his name. But while we're talking about the review scores, that's another thing that happened. Famitsu gave the game a 40 out of 40. Perfect score. They don't do that too often, but there's a conflict of interest. The president of the parent company of Famitsu has a cameo appearance in Death Stranding, so a lot of people understandably calling that out now. Japan in particular, there's a big conversation about the integrity of why is Famitsu, was there something untoward going on between Famitsu and Kojima and Death Stranding, which you would hope not. I would say probably not. That's the thing. I know it's so easy for a lot of people to go, oh yeah, they're paid for reviews, this guy was bought out, this and that. I know that conversation is so needlessly tossed around. That not only does that not happen in the traditional sense of what you're implying, but it's just somewhat ridiculous because there's so many examples of why it doesn't happen. Like, editors don't get fat stacks of cash for giving out a good review, especially for like big sites like IGN and stuff, like where that kind of conversation really happens a lot. All the editors live in San Francisco. It's like really expensive to live there. It's like well over $3,000 for like a 1 or 2 bedroom. Or even for a studio, I guess, in some scenarios. The editors all live together. They're not well off, certainly. The marketing department and the editorial staff are separate. There's plenty of scenarios where a game gets a bad review, but then the ads for that game are all over the site. It just doesn't happen in the traditional sense. Now, what does happen to an extent, and I don't know if it's really that commonplace nowadays, I'm sure it still happens every so often, but publishers would, fly the editors out to review a game, put them up in a hotel, free food. It's not them explicitly saying, hey, you have to give us a good review, but rather the publisher's going for the smooching kind of thing, right? So on a subconscious level, the editor's going, oh man, I'm really getting treated nice here. Oh, and by the way, I'm enjoying this game more than I would have in the office back in San Francisco, right? They're going for a there's never an actual agreement of like, give us a good review. Not on a reputable website. And I say reputable as in, like, it's a big site. IGN, GameSpot. I know people get so worked up about that word reputable, but not like some random, like, little no-name website that isn't held to any sort of employer integrity. Now let's get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this user right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 code, very simple, follow the link down below to the Gleam website. We do this every single week on Let's Talk PlayStation. Supporting this channel in a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week. I am trying to help you pay for the games that you want. Those are some of the news stories I want to talk about you all from this past week. On Tuesday, we unboxed some PS4 accessories from Wish.com, of all things, and we reviewed them as well. Plus, it's a $100 some odd giveaway. I'm going to give away those items to you because I don't really need them after doing the video. So if you didn't see that, go over there, enter the giveaway. You might win some precious, precious crap. And this coming Tuesday, we're going to be talking about some PS5 games, basically games that are confirmed, rumored. We'll be speculating about the first 6 months to a year of PS5 games that we can expect, things like that. What's big is that I wanted to get the next documentary ready for this coming Tuesday. Not going to happen, so that's going to be the following Tuesday, which is great, though, because we are doing the next documentary. The last one was PlayStation Home, but I need a little bit more time to finish up this one, and I'm getting very excited, very jazzed up about it. I love when something comes together, so I'm still editing it right now, but it's looking real good, and I'll tease like the intro or something on Let's Talk PlayStation next week, just so you get a real good idea of what it actually is. That's it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Badecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me. I will see you all next Friday.